Barry Feddema. Okay, let's get rid of that. I've been collecting stamps for over 50 years. Started as a preteen with my father, who was a worldwide collector. He had a set of Minkus Global Supreme albums, probably for my 10th birthday or somewhere around there. You can do the math. I'm 62 now. But he bought me my own set of Minkus Supreme Globals, and I was his duplicate collection. So he would get stamps, and I would have a second set parallel him. He would find stamps, and if he had a duplicate, it would go into my collection. Um, Typical of most collectors at that age, interested and activity has gone up and down over the years, getting married, going to college, goes down, comes up. Now, as we're older, some time, some money, interest is a lot more. I've always been attracted to oddities. Just heavily into pre-cancels, perfins, labels, a lot of things that people don't like. My current passion or interest is forgery. So I collect forgeries, but I remain a worldly at heart. Um, well, getting into so why Albania? That's if you talk to a worldly anybody, Albania is not a very popular area. It's a lot of forgeries, a lot of philatelic influence, and how I got drawn to Albania was consolidating my worldwide collection, starting with the letter A. And actually I saw on, I think it was Applebaum's website, that countries that start with the letter A and B are more popular. They sell better because a lot of people start consolidating, collecting the world. They start with A, they go to B, and they get stuck and they never make it the rest of the way. So I've been consolidating my father's collection for 50 years, and I'm still in the R's, and I've never completed. But so you start with A and you go. But so I was looking at, when I was doing the consolidation, I was interested in forgeries. Saw a reference to the book that's showing up there, Phipps, which is considered the Bible for Albania. Got the books to look at forgeries, read the book, got very interested in the philatelic turmoil that became Albania, and got hooked in it. So, all right, I'm sorry, I didn't put my glasses back on. I gave this talk, a shortened version of it at my local club, and there's a lot of different directions it can go in. Was mainly about initially the creation of the album and the logistics of it. When I gave the talk, it became more a talk about Albania. So I have way more slides than we're ever going to cover. But if there's any questions, gear the conversation. If you want to talk about the album itself, the mechanics of the physical aspects of the album, the decisions that Morton and I will introduce in a little bit, made in creating the album, or if you want more about Albania, just ask questions and we'll either skip slides or jump around to get to that. But enough said. So the overflow of it, why Albania, is a brief history of Albania, genesis of the project, a little bit more about the album, the research, the scope, the production of it. And then I have appendixes that have the history if anybody ends up asking more questions about the Albanian history. Oop, wrong direction. So really quick, and you can't understand the album or the history of Albania or the philatelic history of Albania without knowing a little bit about the history. Very turmoil, a lot of occupations. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. When the Balkans War happened, they were not a participant in the Balkan Wars. They remained neutral during the Balkan Wars. Serbia, Greece, Montenegro, Bulgaria all fought the Ottoman Empire. Albania remained neutral. The Ottoman Empire was weak at that time. They quickly advanced into the territory of Albania. Albania raised its hand to the great powers and said, we want to be independent. The Ottomans surrendered. It became a question for the great powers to divide the lands. And if we look at, sorry, this is going to be a pain in the neck without a real mouse. Let's see. This chart down here shows the occupied territory of all the participants in the Balkan Wars. The blue, Serbia, they had occupied a lot. Bulgaria, Greece, and Montenegro. So they had occupied a lot of the land that they wanted. They each had their own objectives. Serbia wanted an access to the port because they were landlocked. So they wanted access to the Adriatic Sea. When the great powers came in, they granted Albania its independence and basically took all the land, not all, most of the land away from the combatants and gave it to an independent Albania. Obviously, not happy. They fought for the land, they occupied the land, and now it was being taken away from them. The great powers installed a foreign prince from Weed. They nominated somebody from Weed, Germany, to come in and run the country. He ended up lasting 6 months. A lot of internal dissent with having a foreign monarch there, and that's repeated again. What happens is World War I broke out. People came in and took over the land again. World War I ended. It was independent. Same thing happened. Occupations. So the chapters of the album are there, and if you look, you see it's pre-independence, and then there's a war, and then there's occupations. There's independence again, World War I, and then there's occupations. Independence, World War II happens, and there are occupations. In each of the occupations, the Albania was one country, but philatelically it was always separate. The north was either occupied by Serbia or Montenegro, the central, Italy. The south was always being occupied by Greece, who considered it part of Epidus and their occupation. So but if you look at a standard album of Albania, it lists chronologically, but in actuality, at any given time, there's 3 different Albania's philatelic things going on. Yes.
And why is it not? Is it resources, strategic location? What is the reason in these countries are going back?
So, Albania had no army, essentially, right? So from the beginning, from the Balkan Wars, all the people around it had objectives they wanted. Serbia wanted access to the sea. Greece wanted what they considered their territorial part that was given to Albania that they called Epirus. Actually, Epirus formed its own autonomous after one of these occupations, but people wanted the land. Albania had no military to fight it. So, and they felt that the great powers took all the land away from them when they settled and gave Albania this big chunk of land. So it was always people wanting to get a little bit more of it. And war broke out. Albania's independence was guaranteed by the great powers, Great Britain, later on United States and France. And when the war broke out, their attention turned otherwise. Obviously, they're fighting their own war. And then the regional people would come back and say, we want this land, and repeat and on forth. So the genesis of the project, and I see he's on Morton. So he was the webmaster, still is the webmaster of stampforgeries.com. So we had met each other, and this was beginning of COVID, a little bit before that. So we had met each other and corresponded extensively about forgeries. We both had an interest in custom albums. He would find an album that he found that he would like on the web. He would send it to me. I would find the same. We'd share. We ended up developing a mutual taste for an album that we liked, as far as historical and stamps, blending that in with some maps, and we developed a taste that we had. I was developing my interest in Albania through studying the forgeries and the history of it, and we decided let's just try our own custom album and we picked it, Albania. It says a year, but it's probably much more than that. A year in production. We have what was passing around here as our results. Yes.
What is the website?
It's www.stampforgeries.com. And Morton is actually on the call. It's something that I was going to say this for later. So when I get into how we did the album, we corresponded via email. He's in Denmark. He's in Denmark. I'm in the United States. So we had a time difference, but I've never spoken to him, even to this day. So maybe at the end of the single, but I've never heard his voice. It was 100% emails. Now we go through Facebook IMs, but a lot of emails, probably 5,000 emails, constant back and forth, but we have never spoken. All right, Morton? He's still on mute. So, yes. Oh, no, he's the name down there. So, the first thing that we talked about, and again, now we're getting into more of the logistics of the album. If this is of no interest, raise your hand and say, we talk more about the stamps or whatever. So the first thing we had to do is come up with a size. As I mentioned before, I'm a Minkus fan. I still love Minkus. Everything I do has to fit in a Minkus binder. You know, the classic, they're 4-inch. I have bookcases of them. Anything I do ends up being cut to that size. That's Morton, being from Europe, has its standard size of A4. So, like when they created the box from when they took narrow screen TV to the new widescreen TVs, they had to come out with a format. We had to settle on a format that worked for us. So the album is created in A4. For me, what I did is I take 11 by 17 tabloid paper, cut it down to fit the Minkus dimensions. And it was such that A4 was enough so I could have my margins, he could have his. The next thing that dealing with was the weight of the paper. We wanted to use hingeless mounts, but I needed to print it on laser printer. So there's a lot of prototyping to find the right weight of paper that I could print in a laser printer, but was still sturdy enough to have to hold the mounts. I ended up on 110-pound cardstock. Morton, this might be a little bit lighter. And then came down to hinging. You know, so you have thick pages that are in an album. They're hard to turn. They get stuck up. I have a 4-inch wide album, so opening it up, they don't all stick up. So I play with a lot of different options. I had the lighthouse style slots that Lighthouse lectern albums use that with the splits over here on the side. I've also seen LB that uses linen hinges. They have a thick page. I have a linen strip on it. And there's also A4 size page protectors. So I played with all of them. The album that's passing around is an A4 page protector. That's not what I did. That's why at the end of this, it'll be a raffle, and whoever, if anybody's interested in the album, they can have that and walk away with it. But I ended up with the lighthouse style slots that I use. That works fine in my 4-inch binder, and they turn nicely and lay flat. So the one thing that Morton and I agreed on, the general layout that we like, was the left side of the page was a story, had maps, a little bit of history of the country, a little bit of history about the stamps, has a chart with the catalog numbers, printing information, and the right hand was the stamps. That was the one thing that we had also, you know, developed in our looking at albums that we both like: left side story, right side stamps. So what that looks like in a typical page, that's just a random typical page that we have. So on the left side, we have a little bit about the history, a little bit about the stamp. We have a chart down here that's got the printing information, catalog numbers, and a map that shows what's going on. And over on the right side, we have the actual stamp images. So again, as I went through this, so probably 20 different prototypes, the multiple hinge types. In addition to the paperweights, ended up with 3 or 4 different colors. So the scope of the album. So the album is geographical rather than political. By that, I mean, we took the approach of modern day Albania. Any stamp that was issued in that physical footprint was open for our album. So that includes before Albania's independence in 1913. It was an Ottoman country, so there's spots for Ottoman Empire stamps with cancels from Albanian towns. Same thing with Austrian Levant. With capitulation treaties, Austria had post offices in Albania prior to independence. Serbian stamps, Bulgarian stamps of the occupations, Montenegro, all stamps that were the actual stamp of a foreign country, but you could tell through the postmark that it was issued in Albania through a military postmark or non-military postmark that it was there. There's also occupation stamps when Greece occupied, when Italy occupied. Those are typically found. If you go to a regular Scott or Minkus album, there's a page in the back, Albanian occupation stamps, and there'll be overprinted stamps that Italy and Greece issued for Albania, but they're in Italy and Greece and standard album, we have them included in ours. And then also mentioned it before, Epidus was a autonomous country that came up in the southern part that declared autonomy, so they're also included in this. You know, the one thing down at the bottom is, so this is, you know, it's a little bit of a difference between an album and a display. This is, you know, not that anybody else will ever be interested in it, but it is an album. It's meant to be it's not customized to Morton's or I collection. There's not a cover there that says this is unique to us and it describes that, or a unique stamp. It's meant to be more of a specialized shoe album that anybody could pick up. If they're rich, if they're lucky, they could fill the album completely. So it's an album, not a display. So if you happen to win the raffle and go home with an album, you're not gonna be, oh, this is Barry Feddema's stamp. I can't ever get that until I give him a lot of money. But it is a general specialized album. So this is my top. So what it includes, basically almost everything except for the bottom. So it includes provisional stamps. It includes bogus stamps that were issued, not issued, questionable stamps that have uncertain catalog status as non-issued stamps, stamps that were made but never issued. But the one thing, and very interesting, given Morton's and I interest in forgeries, there's no spots for forgeries. So how that happened, it's up for reflection. But so provisional stamps, bogus stamps, questionable stamps, non-issued stamps, everything is in scope for the album except for forgeries.
Forgeries in the album, so people are aware.
No. Yes, one example, and that's actually in the last handout, and in the packets that I gave you, there is a forged stamp. I added that at the appendix, but no, there's not. We don't go into. Well, we'll do a plating study where we'll.
A warning that forgeries exist.
Almost every stamp in Albania has been forged. I mean, it's very heavily forged country because a lot of the stuff is rare, but there's and it was formed when people weren't aware, and then like old forgeries. But no, that's a project yet to be to create my forgery album. But no, we did not get into warnings. No.
Could you clarify that what a bogus would be?
A bogus is, well, it's also in the packet, is a stamp from the Murdites. It was a Catholic. There was a heavy philatelic influence. So people created stamps for stamp collectors, but it was never issued. So that's why what I'm calling a bogus stamp. It was created for collectors. Actually, that one was one time Scott listed, but it was never issued never used. There was a lot of people that would create stamps and with all the occupations and stuff. There was actually cases people would print stamps and then go walk around to military people and say, why don't you issue these stamps?
So bogus stamps are reproductions for collectors. How do you define forgeries?
Forgeries or so that's always there's always a phantom of a forgery. Yeah, so for a postal forgery, a collector's forgery. The forgeries we're talking here are made for collector forgeries. So that's what I'm saying. They're not in there.
Well, I know, but I'm trying to understand the difference between a bogus stamp and a forgery.
A bogus stamp it's not created afterward, but it was created at the time in the country by somebody who wanted to create it and make it legitimate, and sell it for collectors. Or somebody, a rebel group wanted to advertise their cause, and some people thought it was a stamp, but it never actually got issued. So a stamp that was created for either philatelic or advertising purposes that was never actually saw any postal use.
Instead of defrauding a collector, which you're saying forgery.
Yes.
To the bogus would defraud a
collector
government system.
So the forgeries, again, it could be a stamp that was made, a copy of an existing stamp that was created by somebody to sell to a collector. That's why I would consider a forgery or a postal forgery. There was actually one issue, the Mochapishas that's in there that was created and then went through the mail, but it was never issued. But they created a fake letter from a commander that said, yes, I authorize these stamps. They sent them to stamp dealers throughout the world. So there's covers that went through the postal system. They got slipped into the postal system that sell on eBay constantly $500 for a cover, and usually to a stamp dealer or stamp magazine trying to legitimate, but they're considered a bogus issue. They're not listed in most catalogs. In this case, Hellas listed it because it's a Greek stamp. So there's always a little bit of a balance between and a lot of stamps are not Scott listed, but they are listed in Mikkel. So is that a bogus stamp or is that just a non-Scott issued stamp. It's there's no clear cut dividing line. So postmarks. So our general approach to postmarks was we didn't like, even if we could create a unique box for each post office. If you look through the album or the pages that are there, a lot of the Ottoman stamps are like one or two known. So we weren't going to create a box. We have a great reference book that's got the actual cancellation there. We could have created a box and say, this canceled for this town, but we never filled them. I'm not that good at reading Turkish or whatever the correct name for their script is. So we just created, our approach was create a quadrille. Show the stamp, show where it was issued, create a quadrille, put them in. Because you also don't know what size that's going to be. A lot of cancels are best done on cover because then you can see the whole cancel, where on the stamp you only see a part. So our approach for postmarks was just to show the stamp and put a quadrille. So and this is in your handout. This is an actual page left and right from the album for Ottoman precursor stamps. So we list the town that it was from, and then the type, which is from the standard Ottoman postmark catalogs. Up at the top up here, we show what the type is, and down here you can say, all right, so from Durazzo, which is also track 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10. That's going to keep happening. Stamps were issued. So that's the approach that we took for postmarks. Errors and varieties, the same thing. If it was a listed variety, we show all errors as much as possible. We illustrate them. In the case of a lot of the early Albanian stamps from the provisional government, they were all handmade. So they were hand stamps. Some were actually typewritten in. Some were 3-part hand stamps. So there's a lot of inverts. There's a lot of typos. So, and some catalogs list like, a misspelling of this. So the same thing in that case, we just put a quadrille and say a color error or a typo error. That's again an actual page from the album for the typographic. So the hand stamp, it was as a 3-part. They had a hand stamp in different colors for different denominations. The eagle was a separate hand stamp, again, different colors for different denominations. And they would go in with that typewriter and type in a value. So obviously a manual process, very prone to errors, but also, an interesting issue. So that's an actual page from my album here. So you'll see that I did settle on the slots, the lighthouse style slot. So that's an actual page showing the regular stamps up there. Then down here, some color errors, inverted eagle. Over here, this is the independence issue. I hate touchpads. So, and sometimes the eagle is missing. Down here, they missed the value. They wrote it in hand. So again, just the approach that we took to the album was not to tie it in, again, make it a specific Barry album, make it general, there's a lot of errors for these, color errors. You can put in what you like for that. Errors, so there are some well-defined errors. In this case, we listed what the exact error was, what plate position it is on the left side. Another part of the album's scope is plate studies. So, and I guess one of the nice things about stamp collecting is there's a lot of standard stamp collecting phrases. Oh, it's great, you learn geography, you learn history. Another one is that you can collect any way you like. Nobody's going to tell you what to collect, how to collect it. So in doing this, we were interested, there's a couple well-known plate studies that were in the book that from Phipps, and we just said, all right, we're just going to put in a couple of plate studies. So we picked a couple, 3 of them. One, getting back to your point about forgery to identify them. The first one, the Course Republic, very extensively forged issue. I don't think I've seen, if you go on eBay, unless it's a very specialized collection, they're all forgeries. I looked around dealers today, everybody's selling the stamp as a genuine and it's a forgery. And the easy way to do it is a plate study. The original stamp came in a plate of 12. And if you look at how to expertise that, it's done through a plate study. So that's why we included that plate study to say, here's the exact plate for each of these 12. In that case, you can tell your stamp is genuine, but it wasn't done to say if this is a forgery or not. It was just because we were interested in that plate study. Another one of the plate studies was the overprinted Austrian fiscal stamps. The one down here was done in a sheet of 40, but they didn't have enough font to make all the numbers. If in the upper right-hand corner they did a denomination, they didn't have enough typeset to make all the fonts the same. So they just pulled random fonts. So there's different, and I'll show you a page from the actual album. There's different fonts, different typeset for those numbers. So that was an interesting plate study too. So we included that in the album. The final plate study we have is a German occupation stamp that, again, a lot of errors. That's a very popular stamp, unlike the rest of Albania, because that's considered a German occupation stamp. So all the German collectors in the world that collect this stamp extensively, and very hard to find. That makes it great that it's popular, but also makes it very hard to find the plate study. So that was the other plate study that we included. Again, here's the pages from the album, and you have them in your handout of the 3 plate studies that we had. The Force Autonomous, the fonts. So again, here, this is, at the beginning I said album is not finished yet because we're always going to clean it up. These are, scans that we created, and over here are the actual numeral differences. I'd like to clean that up a little bit, but so we have the different font that created that, and then down here is the combinations of this 0 and this 2 on what stamps that they're on. So that's the actual page of the right-hand side of those 2 collections. So there's the 12 positions of the Coursed Eagles. And I don't know if you can see it here, but if you look at the upper numerals, you can see some font differences as you zoom in. So that's different fonts that were created because they didn't have enough typeset. That's the other plate study. It's actually a diagram that was out of one of the old catalog. One of the specialists in the issue, created that chart. We liked it, so we copied the chart, put that in, and then we used his illustrations, over here to show the actual plate variants for that. Research for it. This APRL was phenomenal. Scott was, so there's a combination of buying a lot of books. The book set over here is a set of 10. That's the Albanian or Ottoman Cancel collection. Very beautiful books, unfortunately very expensive, and the APRL doesn't have them. So we had to chip in with other collectors and bought them. I ended up joining a couple new stamp clubs, Opal and the Ottoman Far East, to get access to their journals. And like I said, the APRL was fantastic. My son gave me a book scanner for Christmas as part of this project. So we would take out they would only let you take out 5 books at a time, probably have 10 mailings from them, 50 books that we take out, would scan it, send it back, sometimes a little late. Scott's not here to yell at me, but she can now, but yeah, so, but I'm in good standing. I was one of their better customers. So we get a book, scan it, and a lot of research goes into it. The book that I mentioned, Phipps, is phenomenal. It's considered the Bible for Albania, but on a lot of the stuff, he references other stuff. Like he would, if it was military cancelled, he would say, see the French military cancel book. If it was an Italian military cancel, he would say, see this book. If it's an Ottoman, he'd say, it's outside of my scope. So he gave a great framework. The references in the back of the book, and I have it here if anybody's interested in seeing it, is like 4 or 5 pages thick, but a lot of them are hard to find. So APRL was great. Some books we bought for future purpose, but I spent more money and time on scanning and buying books than the stamps themselves.
Now, when you scanned the books, did you also send a digital scan to the APRL?
Well, so now this is taking a sideward down. So copyright issues aside, and a lot of you spent a lot of money on books between Morton and I. So I feel I contribute to the philatelic authorship. If the book was available in print, we would buy it. There's also have some other collectors of of cancellations in Norway and Sweden, we would chip in, buy it, I would scan it, we would share it. Is that a copyright violation? Technically, yes, but we're not selling it, we're not distributing it, we bought the book. Same thing with the APRL. A lot of the stuff that we got there is, it's out of print. You can't find it anywhere. So no, we did not share files back to the APRL. We would gladly do it, but that's a side conversation, but yes. Same thing with the journals. I joined 2 collectors clubs just to get access to their journals. And we did offer to Scott, and he's going to do it. We had the Albanian Collectors Club. I was able to track down all them in PDF. And as part of his journal digitization, we offered that to him on a CD because we got the permission from the club as default, but the de facto survivors to say, this is the Skanderberg is a great journal. Please put it in. So that's in queue to be added to the APRL. Catalog research. So Scott coverage of Albania is pretty poor in general. So Mikhail is our standard base. For the Greek occupations, bought, didn't scan them. So we have a full set of Hellas catalogs, bought, didn't scan the Franco. It's a specialized Albanian album. That's an ebook. I shared it, but we did buy our original copy of it. So, as you're looking at the pages, Mikhail, if it's listed, then we list the alternative specialized catalog there. So the approach that we had, and this gets back to a lot of emails with Morton, is a 24/7 effort. I was responsible for the left side research, creating the catalog chart, scouring the internet for maps and pretty interesting postcards or whatever. Morton was responsible for the right side box creation and the final print copy, if you would, the editor on the right-hand side. So I would work it, diligently, create all my stuff, send it to him. A lot of times till midnight, he would take it. First thing I do when I wake up in the morning, go run, check email, see what Morton had done, created that. We had a couple hours where we're both online at the same time. We'd go back and forth. I like this, I don't like this, but generally it was I do my research, send it to him. He does his editing, sends it back to me, have a little bit of collaboration time. And there's a lot of feedback. As you look through the album, like for each page, it was like, all right, I found a great map. How do we incorporate that map into it? Or here's a really cool postcard. How do we fit that postcard into it? So it was, a lot of creative back and forth. But again, I've never spoken to the gentleman. So album production, again, getting a little bit back to the album, 11/17. So I had bought this from previous pre-canceled albums. I have a, paper size, I would cut it. My wife, I sent her the invite. She didn't join, God bless her soul. I found on eBay a paper drill a long time ago. So she went and picked that up for me. So I had a paper drill to drill the holes for the slots. I ended up drilling 2 holes on each side and cutting it manually. I looked all over the place for a stamp. I could stamp that. And I didn't want to use Linder paper at $1 a sheet. So we took 11/7, 11/17, cut it, drilled holes, cut it, rounded the corners, installed the hinge mount, and went forward. That's essentially it. I'm going to assume we don't want to go too much through history, but we can go back to that. So the stamps that are in the packets, the one stamp listed as a bogus was a stamp that was never issued. The Murdites were a Catholic group within Albania that did not, the Muslims, the Greek Orthodox, they issued these stamps. As you can see, in 1932, they were recognized by Scott. Scott still skips those spots. They're listed in Everett. They're listed in all the major catalogs. They are now considered bogus. If you're a worldwide collector, you've probably seen these stamps. They're around often. But they were the Murdite Catholics. They actually have some that are canceled, but they never saw any philatelic actual postal use. The other stamp in the packet is autonomous course. This was part of World War I and southern France, Ypres. The Greek had occupied it. The great powers sent France in to control the town of Kors. They issued stamps for autonomous Republic of Kors. They're listed under all catalogs as Albanian stamps, and typically in an album they're included in Albania. But as I said, this is an extensively forged stamp. There weren't that many of them made, but almost every time you go on eBay, they're there. The catalog value of these is depressed because there's so many forgeries out there. They're actually very rare stamps. And so this was a page out of Focus on Forgeries by Tyler that shows how to differentiate the two of them. So in the packet, there's a genuine stamp. There's also a forged stamp. I'll leave it up to you to determine that. And actually, if you go back, because in the handout, there's a plating study. If you're really enthusiastic, you can take the stamp you have and plate it to one of the 12 positions. But that's assuming that anybody's truly interested in that. That's the bulk of the the conversation. If there's any other questions or about Albania or the album process or our creative process? Yes.
You've done, okay, you're working on Albania.
Albania is done except for me mounting my collection.
Are you working on or planning to work on other countries?
Morton, you want to step in? Yes. So Morton right now, yes, we have a whole layout done where he is currently working on Denmark. He has done a lot of work. He's waiting on me to get caught up because I've been very busy and he's probably very annoyed with me and he's going to stay on mute and not say that. But yes, we have Denmark as our next country. We've fallen in love with the Balkans, but I have a lot of Australian stamps. It's another interesting country. So Denmark, Australia, or maybe Greece, because we've fallen in love with this region, all the turmoil and stuff. But yes, we have an optimistic goal of an album a year.
Wow.
Optimistic. Fact that he's been working on Denmark for 4 or 5 months and I haven't put a single effort in says that. Oh, I skipped it. Let me go back one. Where the heck did it go? So I grabbed the wrong version of this. There is a Facebook group, and I apologize for having I don't know how that happened. I must not have saved it. There is a Facebook group for stamp album pages. It has 4,200 members of people that make stamp albums, share the results on Facebook, make them available if you want to download them. Sometimes when you had interviewed me for the APRL, I would think that'd be something that'd be phenomenal for the APRL and part of the digital collection is to have stamp albums. They have some right now, but they're generic. But people like myself create an album, very proud of it, very willing to share it for free. It'd be interesting to have part of the digital collection in the APRL be stamp albums that people have created. The Facebook group, there's 4,200 people. It's very active. I would say there's almost a post almost every day, certainly every week. People are creating albums, and it's everything from specialized fly specking to generic pages, but they're up there and they're generally sharing their files.
You stopped the Albania album at 1925, is that right?
Yes. After that, communist, it becomes wallpaper. That's why a lot of people do not like Albania. It becomes like Poland or Czechoslovakia, a lot of propaganda issues, very little postal use. But yes, we stopped. Also where Phipps stopped his book. Phipps was our guide for all those chapters that we listed were chapters that Phipps had, along those lines. But yes, we stopped in 1945. Denmark, same thing. We're going to stop probably after World War II. Australia, because then it gets boring after that. A lot of the interesting stuff, the maps, the early stuff, So again, collect, stamp collecting. You're allowed to collect what you want, how you want to collect it. But yeah, we stop, at that point.
Is Albania still communist today? Sorry.
Yes. Socialist, communist, yes. Is there any questions from the floor?
George,
Any questions?
are there stamp albums in Albania that would guess or country?
It's yes, there is a stamp. They issue a magazine. We've been in correspondence with them. I have actually my first exhibit that I've ever done. I'm a one-time exhibitor, and it was Chicago PEX last year. The single frame, the Collectors Club of New York, of which I'm a member, created a team for the single frame competition. So I said, let me throw my hat in the exhibiting things. So I had, getting feedback now. The Albania, and Focus on Forgeries by Tyler. There's a course, and there's also another stamp, a Women's Congress. I didn't include it here because it was 1948, that I believed and ended up proving that Tyler was wrong on his classification of what was genuine and what was forged. I spent 10 years tracking it down with another collector, and that's where we were working with collectors in Albania. It was published in the Albania stamp magazine that they have. They have a bi-monthly, twice, 6 a year, as that bi or semi, whatever. But and we were eventually able to prove that yes, Tyler was wrong. The stamp that he had in Focus on Forgeries, and actually on the APRL, on the APS website, was wrong. They had identified the forgery as genuine, and the forgery, and conversely, the genuine stamp as a forgery. So that was my display, my exhibit that I won the novice award at the award. Collectors Club of New York unfortunately came in third place, but I did my part because I got extra points for being a novice. So that's why they as a new display, I was a novice. We got those points, but I got a large Vermeil on my first display. But yes, there is a collectors club in Albania. They have a extensive, a lot of older collectors, but we did correspond with them. They've written some books. Most of the literature is actually non-Albanian. It's a lot of, they don't have one person, Feddema, who was the head of the club, who's unfortunately recently passed, wrote a book. I have the book, and he was the one I corresponded to on this issue. And it's a very unpopular issue in Albania because it's not gummed, it's ugly. And he said, why would anybody forge that stamp? They all had, and they were actually instrumental because all the copies they had in their collections that were passed down from their fathers were all the ones that Tyler called a forgery that we called a genuine. So he helped bolster my argument. But I actually ended up finally kicking it to the final proof. And I wrote an article for the Collectors Club of New York, and that was published, and that led to my display. Is on eBay, I found the UPU archives of the Portuguese colony Angola, whatever. When they left, they sold their archives, and I was scanning through, and lo and behold, there was the archives of Albania, and there was the stamp. I got the lot, and that was the final nail in the cross to say, look, the UPU archives has that stamp as the genuine that Tyler had called a forgery. So that was the keystone of my exhibit. And
the UPU collection compares the pure collection.
But we tracked down, again, with help of the APRL, the Smithsonian. We were able to get the UPU librarian. She sent me the original publication, not a copy of, not the original, but from 1948 that described the stamps. So.
Every year, one great exhibit. It was the stamp had the little stars.
I'm sorry?
The exhibit that you were talking about.
Yes. Yes.
It had the small stars.
Stars, yes, exactly.
I was present. It was very worthwhile.
Oh, good. Thanks. I was actually going to include those in the packet too, but it went past the frame. But I have a lot of those stamps. Thank you for that. So again, if there is any interest, that album, wherever it is up for, if anybody wants to put their name in a hat, we can draw it, or I can plug it back home. But that is a duplicate. And if anybody's interested, wants to start collecting Albania, it's there. I'll let Melanie collect names, or if nobody really wants it, my feelings won't be hurt. I'll drag it back home.
I just want to say it's a true labor of love, and I think the concept of history, images, maps, etc. on the left, so you don't have stamps hitting each other.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Yeah, I mean, it became more about the album than the stamps. That's why, despite the fact that I haven't helped with Denmark yet, very much looking forward to it because, it adds a lot to it, and I honestly had very little knowledge of Albania. the Balkan Wars, and the fights and the struggles. Just as a side note, one thing that I learned that, that really surprised me, and the way things are right now in the world, maybe it should have surprised me, but there was a lot of extensive research of getting different books, and then it was, again, it was Italian, it was Greece, it was German. The one thing that surprised me is reading literature is the political bias that was in it. Amazing. Like if I pick up a Greek album or catalog or article about this, it's a Greek liberation of this town, or where everything else is the Greek occupation of that town. And then, like, you can get to the point where a couple pages in, this is a Greek author, this is an Italian author, this is a outside English author who Phipps is. I was amazed at the political bias that's crept into stamps, why they're issued, how they were issued, the reason for it. It would truly, that opened my eyes to say, you have to pick up something and you really have to understand the author. Even in doing philatelic research, you would think a stamp is a stamp is a stamp, but incredible the bias that creeps into, whether it's a legitimate issue, whether it's not, why it was issued. That was the one thing that I took away from this that I truly learned. Thank you.
George, we're about to wrap up. Did you have any questions?
No,
We can turn on more.
All right, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Morton, unmute and say hello.
Hello, Barry.
Yeah, I've heard his voice now. There it is. Good to hear your voice. And we will get started on Denmark as soon as I get home.
That sounds very good.